Deku? I think he's some pro. By clouds. My head in the clouds, not coming down. Chapter 27. Powerful. Izuku stared at the hand villain in shock and fear. A side quest? What did that even mean? How did this guy even know who he was? I guess I haven't introduced myself, have I? The hand villain sauntered closer. You're supposed to do that for non-NPC characters. My name is Tomura Shigaraki. You're pretty famous, Deku. Did you know that? All sorts of people are in prison because of you. Izuku swallowed hard and looked to where a razor was lying broken on the ground, still underneath the Nomu. He didn't know if backup was coming, but there was a good chance All Might was on his way by this point. If Izuku could stall the villains, even temporarily, he might be able to keep them from hurting Eraser even more. He gave Shigaraki a shaky smile and stepped up into the plaza. Yep, that's me. Shigaraki grinned. Sensei says you're pretty smart. That's what they keep telling me. Izuku shrugged. But I don't think I'm anything special. Shigaraki scratched at his neck. That's not what Sensei says, he growled. Izuku froze. Downplaying his intelligence was obviously stressing Shigaraki out, which might make him more likely to attack. I mean, I don't actually know my IQ, so I can't tell you objectively I'm actually smarter than anyone else, but if I wasn't, I probably wouldn't be at UA, so... Shigaraki stopped scratching and smiled. Yeah, that's what Sensei said. Sensei's even smarter than you are, Deku. The Mist Villain appeared next to Shigaraki. My apologies, but despite my best efforts, a student escaped. The heroes are no doubt on their way. Shigaraki scratched violently at his neck. Kurakiri, you idiot! If you weren't our warp gate, I'd kill you right now. Izuku tried to calm his breathing and keep his hope in check. Heroes were on the way, but that didn't mean they were out of the woods yet. His best bet was to keep stalling Shigaraki and keep him from doing anything too violent until All Might arrived. Maybe we should kill Shigaraki, Izuku said loudly. You said something about a quest for me? I'm sure your sensei wouldn't be too happy if you didn't let me know about it. Yes. Shigaraki turned to look at him again. Sensei is so excited to meet you. Who is your sensei? Keep him talking. Shigaraki pointed at the Nomu. I'm sure you've noticed my Nomu isn't exactly normal, right? Izuku nodded, keeping him talking. I've noticed he's pretty powerful, and that he seems to obey your orders. Shigaraki nodded. He is pretty powerful, but Sensei makes him seem like a mid-level boss, he cackled. Nomu here has multiple quirks. He's got regeneration, shock absorption, not to mention super strength. The quirks mess with his brain a bit, but... He shrugged. What can you do? Izuku's mind spun. He wanted to say it was impossible for someone to have that many quirks, but... Togata had 2 quirks, didn't he? If there was a quirk that could be passed down like All Might's, was it possible that there was a quirk that could bestow multiple quirks? Oh, dang. He was probably supposed to respond, wasn't he? How did Nobu get all these quirks? Izuku did his best to look intrigued. I'm assuming he wasn't born with them. Nope! Shigaraki grinned. That's my sensei's quirk. He can take quirks from wherever he wants and give them to his loyal followers. That's where you come in, Deku. Izuku felt slightly nauseous. He hoped he was wrong about where this was going. Me? Shigaraki nodded. Sensei promised that if you come with us and use that big brain of yours to help the League, he'll give you a quirk. Wouldn't it be nice to not be quirkless anymore? Shut up! Sue shouted from behind him. He's a villain, Midoriya. You can't believe a word he says. Izuku cursed and tried to wave her away. How are they still here? He had to keep control of the situation. Izuku glanced towards the door. Just keep Shigaraki occupied a little longer. What kind of quirk are we talking about? I don't think I'd need an intelligence quirk. Like you mentioned, that's already in my arsenal. And I'm a decent quirkless fighter. What quirk could Sensei have that you could tempt me? Shigaraki shrugged. Any quirk you want. Sensei's got a lot of options, but I bet that even if you pointed out a random quirk off the street, Sensei would be happy to steal it for you. Don't listen to him! Mineta screamed. What he's saying is impossible! Everyone knows that! Shigaraki scowled and started scratching at his neck again, and Izuku wished his classmates would stop trying to help. No, he's not lying. He looked Shigaraki in the eye. I know that it's possible. Shigaraki smiled. Then will you accept? Izuku took a deep breath and hesitated. He could keep playing along and say yes, but he didn't think it was smart to let the villains think they'd won him over. They might try to kidnap him or even seek him out after this if they thought he was interested in joining up. But All Might was on his way, so Izuku wouldn't have to deal with Shigaraki's wrath for too long. Hopefully. No, he said finally. I've gotten this far quirkless, and I don't think I want a quirk anymore. Izuku clenched his fists. I don't need to be powerful to be useful, Shigaraki. Shigaraki's face twisted in rage, and he screamed as he ran at Izuku. He rolled to the side just in time, but Shigaraki was already attacking again. Izuku grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in Shigaraki's face. Scrambling to his feet and grabbing a knife, Shigaraki growled and rubbed his eyes. You little brat! The sand didn't distract him for as long as Izuku had hoped. But this time when Shigaraki ran at him, he was prepared. He gripped his knife a little harder in preparation for what he was planning, and ignored the little voice in his head that screamed he was going too far, that there had to be another way. But Izuku didn't know what else to do. He was outmatched, his opponent was faster and stronger than he was, and 5-point disintegration quirks needed 5 points to work. As soon as Shigaraki reached for him, Izuku pivoted and swung his knife, flinching at the blood as he sliced through the muscle and bone of Shigaraki's left pinky. Izuku almost threw up when he saw that the finger was still hanging on, by only a small piece of skin and muscle. He'd done that. He'd hurt him and likely caused permanent damage just to disable a quirk. Shigaraki screamed in rage and pain, reaching for Izuku and grabbing a forearm with his uninjured hand. Izuku gasped at the pain as his skin and muscles slowly flaked away. He tried to yank his arm away from Shigaraki's tight grasp, but was unable to, until Shigaraki was distracted by a loud bang. I am here to save you! There was a rush of wind, and Izuku found himself standing outside the USJ, with All Might looking down at him with concern. Are you all right, my boy? Izuku nodded. I'm injured, but fine. Go fight the villains, but beware of the Nomu, he's got multiple quirks. All Might frowned. You're injured. Maybe I should... Izuku grit his teeth. I'll be fine, but the other students are in danger. Save them.
But you...
Izuku hit All Might's chest with his uninjured arm. They are here to kill you, All Might. Which you would know if you didn't waste all your time this morning when you were supposed to teach today. Go save the others. They need you just as much as I do. All Might's face hardened.
The others can take care of themselves.
No, they can't! Izuku screamed.
They're students, All Might!
Stop wasting what little time you have left and get in there. Leave me and go. All Might hesitated another long moment before disappearing back into the facility. Izuku scowled and made his way back into the USJ. He needed to make sure Eraser and the other students were safe. Ashido and Uraraka were trying to patch up 13 when he saw them, and he ran to help Asui and Mineta, who was struggling to carry Aizawa up the stairs as All Might traded blows with the Nomu. They laid him next to 13, and Izuku could feel his tears welling up as he took in his injured friend. Midoriya. Asui put her hand on his shoulder. Are you alright? Izuku nodded. I can hardly feel the pain right now, but we need to find the others and get out of here. Hopefully All Might can handle the villains. Mineta pointed a shaky finger down at the plaza.
I don't know if he can.
Izuku looked to see All Might bleeding from his side and slowly being pulled through a portal after he'd apparently tried to suplex the Nomu. Izuku grimaced and started running back down to the plaza as the others yelled for him to stop. Hopefully Aizawa would forgive him, but the world couldn't lose its symbol of peace yet. There was an explosion right as he reached the plaza, and Izuku stopped as he saw Katsuki pin Kurogiri and Todoroki freeze half the Nomu, allowing All Might to escape as Kirishima ran at Shigaraki, who was still cradling his injured hand.
Kids these days really are amazing. Can't have that. Nomu!
The Nomu pulled itself back through the warp gate and tore off its frozen limbs, regrowing them in seconds. Izuku nodded. If he'd created something with multiple quirks, regeneration would definitely be one of them. The others, though, were shocked.
What is this?
All Might was still clutching his side.
I thought you said that his quirk was shock absorption.
Izuku scowled. He'd warned him that the Nomu had multiple quirks. Had All Might even listened to him?
Nomu's been engineered to take you on at even 100% of your power, Shigaraki said, gritting his teeth through the pain. He's basically a highly efficient punching bag that hits back. First things first, though, we need to free our method of escape. Nomu! Get him!
Izuku gasped as the Nomu ran for Katsuki, and a massive cloud of dust billowed from the impact. Katsuki!
I'm right here, you idiot!
Katsuki was sitting beside Kirishima, dusty and bruised from being tossed, but okay.
But then...
Kirishima looked over towards the Nomu.
How did you get over here?
Isn't it obvious? Todoroki pointed to where the dust was clearing to reveal All Might, his arm still raised to block the punch.
These are kids and you didn't hold back?
Blood was starting to leak from the corner of All Might's mouth.
He was pinning my warp gate, so it's not like I had much choice, Shigaraki said. And besides, these kids are no angels.
He held up his mangled hand.
That one even tried to cut my hand apart. What kind of hero does something like that?
Katsuki looked at Izuku incredulously, and he grimaced. Yeah, it really did sound bad when Shigaraki put it like that. All Might cut off Shigaraki's monologue about heroic violence.
I think you're just doing whatever you want and trying to hide behind values.
Shigaraki chuckled.
You figured me out, huh? Nomu! Kill him!
Dust filled the plaza as Nomu and All Might started fighting.
If he's designed to defeat me at 100%,
All Might grit his teeth.
Then I'll just have to go beyond that. Plus Ultra!
He sent the Nomu flying through the ceiling, then turned to Shigaraki.
I guess I really am getting weaker. That took more than 300 punches.
Shigaraki was scratching at his neck with his good hand.
Cheetah. How did he beat Nomu? What villain?
All Might looked as powerful as ever, but Izuku could see the steam mixed in with the dust. He was out of time.
I thought you were going to kill me.
Shigaraki screamed and threw himself at All Might, and Izuku knew that this was how it was going to end. All Might probably couldn't move or he'd reveal his true form, and he was probably willing to die to keep that secret, considering how long he'd kept being a hero despite his condition. But if the symbol of peace were to be killed here by heroes, crime would skyrocket all over Japan. The world couldn't lose their symbol like this. Izuku cursed and started running. All Might not reveal his true form to save himself, but he would to save someone else. And who better than the kid he already thought was weak and defenseless?
Midoriya, no!
All Might grabbed him and rolled to the side in a puff of steam, as Izuku ran into Shigaraki's line of fire. All of a sudden, gunfire rang out, and Shigaraki screamed again. Izuku looked to see him disappear into a warp gate right before his view was obscured by one of Cementos' walls. All Might glared at him as the steam of his transformation finally cleared.
That was incredibly reckless, young Midoriya.
Izuku met his eyes. So was letting yourself die just to keep a secret. All Might's face softened.
I'm just glad you're all right.
He put his hand on Izuku's shoulder.
After today, young Midoriya, I hope you've seen how reckless it is for you to be a hero. There's no shame in dropping out of the hero course now that you've seen what real villains are like.
Izuku knocked All Might's hand away, and his eyes hardened. Up until this point, Izuku figured he'd kind of been in the denial stage of grief, mourning the loss of the hero he'd grown up admiring. But he'd forgotten that anger was a stage of grief too. And that's all Izuku felt as he looked at the hero who would crush his dream, even after he'd saved his life. It's a good thing Izuku had new heroes now. Izuku stood and started walking back to the entrance, before stopping and looking back at All Might, who was still standing there, pleading with his eyes for Izuku to just give up and stay safe. I already knew what real villains were like, All Might, he said lowly. But you'd know that if you'd ever bothered to know me, rather than deciding I'm weak just because I'm quirkless. Toshinori watched Midoriya's back as he walked away. What had the boy meant when he said he already knew what villains were like? How had he remained so calm when the other students were panicking? Had Midoriya really been the one to cut off Shigaraki's finger? He couldn't have. He was quirkless, right? Helpless, just like Toshinori had been before Nana gave him her quirk. Or was he? Chapter 28. Hospitals and Research. Izuku rubbed his eyes as he stared at the screen of his laptop. As tired as he was, he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep until he knew Eraser was all right. And besides, he needed to do something to distract him from his overwhelming anger. He glanced over at his teacher, unconscious on the hospital bed, as Joke dozed off in the hard plastic chair pushed up against the wall. He should probably offer her the couch, but then he'd have to wake her up and she might not be able to fall asleep again. Izuku itched at the bandage on his forearm. Recovery Girl had said he was lucky the disintegration hadn't gotten to the bone, so he'd escape with just a scar, but even with her quirk, it would still take a few days to heal completely. He shook his head and picked up his notebook. Information on the villains they'd arrested was easy to find, but that wasn't what Izuku was interested in right now. What he wanted was info on Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and the one they called Sensei. So far, Izuku didn't have much. He knew a lot about Shigaraki's quirk and how it worked, but that was only because he'd seen it in person. Even after Sakauchi gave him access to the government quirk files, Izuku couldn't find any record of a person with Shigaraki's quirk. At least, not one that was alive. There had been a woman with a nearly identical quirk, but she'd died nearly 50 years ago. Kurogiri's quirk was even worse. Izuku only saw Warp Gate being used a few times, so didn't really get the chance to see what weaknesses and limitations it had. Did Kurogiri have to be able to see where he was warping? Did he have to have been there? Was there any limit, however large, to the size of his Warp Gates? After what he found on Shigaraki's quirk, Izuku broadened his search to any Warp Gates recorded since the dawn of quirks on a hunch, just in case Warp Gate wasn't the quirk Kurogiri had been born with, but nada. Sure, there were some other warp quirks, but none of those exactly matched what he'd seen. It was so frustrating. And it all came back to Sensei. Izuku sighed and started combing through online forums, looking for any mention of a man who could give and take quirks. A couple of people mentioned someone called All for One, but they were always shot down pretty quick because All for One was a legend, a boogeyman. He couldn't be a real person, could he? Izuku made a note and decided to look deeper into All for One. There were stories about him going back for years, even centuries. Izuku had thought that was because he was a legend created around the dawn of quirks, but if he were real, well, he could be dead, or he could have a longevity quirk, or All for One could be an inheritable quirk, like All Might's, and the name just fell to whoever had the quirk. There were just too many options. He decided to start by researching the earliest references first. That way, even if it was a different person with the same quirk, or claiming to have that quirk, Izuku would still be able to understand the history. There were lots of stories from around the dawn of quirks, but many of them seemed to have been exaggerated. It was easy to see where the legend came from. Superpowers had been so new then that not many people knew how they worked. Being quirkless seemed normal at that point, so some people with quirks didn't want them, but others wanted the power that came with having superhuman abilities. A man that could give and take quirks must have seemed like a miracle worker in that environment. According to the stories Izuku could find, All for One had created a veritable yakuza with hundreds of loyal followers. There were just as many stories of people saying he made us gods as there were saying he cured us of our mutations, so Izuku figured he had loyalty among both the quirked and quirkless. He also seemed more comfortable in the shadows, letting his lackeys do more and more of the dirty work as he gained more disciples. Izuku was about to move on from that original All for One when an article caught his eye. It was just a gossip magazine expose on the man behind the quirk and what contributed to his rise in villainy, and Izuku almost didn't bother reading it, but the photo printed alongside the article seemed familiar for some reason. Izuku stared at it for a long moment, trying to figure out where he'd seen it before. Oddly enough, it wasn't All for One who seemed familiar, but the young man standing next to him that the caption identified as his quirkless younger brother. Where had Izuku seen him before? Wait! Izuku dug through his old files and entered the password to view the encrypted file he'd made on All Might's quirk. He'd hit a dead end when researching because one of the holders had a quirkless mentor, but he clicked on an image of the first holder smiling alongside his serious mentor, then looked back at the photo included with the article and... Yep, it was the same guy. But All for One's brother had mentored a man to be a hero and started a whole line of heroes, so shouldn't All for One have been a hero too? Or maybe his brother should have been a villain. Maybe... Izuku cried out as Joke grabbed the laptop off his lap. Alright, kiddo. You've been sitting there since the doctors let us in. You need to sleep. But... Izuku reached for his laptop, but Joke held it out of reach. No! She shook her head. What you need to do is save your work and close your eyes for a while, even if you can't sleep. Don't forget you were injured too, or would you like me to get Recovery Girl over there to whack you over the head with her stick? Izuku sighed. Fine, but if I can't get to sleep after half an hour, I go back to my research, okay? Joke smiled and gave him back the laptop. Izuku saved his work, encrypting his All for One file just like he'd done with his research on All Might's quirk, before setting it down on the floor next to him. Joke handed him a blanket and ruffled his hair, making Izuku roll his eyes. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, but laid down and closed his eyes anyway, to make Joke think he was at least trying. Apparently, he was more tired than he thought, though, because he was out almost immediately. Shota groaned as he opened his eyes, only to find out he couldn't really see. He tried to move his hands to see if there was something covering his eyes, but they hurt, and felt like they were tied to his chest. What was going on? Was there really something covering his face, or was he blind now? He started hyperventilating as the memories started filtering in. The attack on USJ, Shigaraki, Nomu, Deku. Where was Deku? Was he okay? Eraser? Crap, Shota, breathe with me. You're okay. You're at the hospital, you're safe. Shota felt himself melting with relief at Fukakado's voice, and he tried to match her breathing. He was safe. He was in the hospital. Okay, but...
Deku, is he okay? The last thing I remember, he was facing down the villains.
Fukakado chuckled. See for yourself. Shota frowned.
My eyes.
Oh, crap! Sorry. Shota felt hands brush gently against his face, and then he was looking at Fukakado's face as she brushed the bandages out of the way. The doctor says your orbital floor was damaged, so you should probably rest your eyes as much as you can. I just didn't think about how freaked out you'd be waking up and not being able to see anything. I'm sorry, Eraser. Shota tried to nod, but stopped when a movement sent a jolt of pain through his neck.
Deku, is he alright?
Fukakado rolled her eyes and stepped to the side slightly, letting Shota see Deku passed out on the couch, notebooks and loose papers crumpled around him as his laptop sat on the floor next to him. He's been researching the League of Villains ever since Recovery Girl healed him, trying to track them down. Fukakado sighed. I forced him to go to sleep about an hour ago, but I can wake him up if you want to talk to him. Shota wanted to shake his head, but he figured that'd go about as well as nodding, so he didn't.
No, let him sleep. He must be exhausted, especially if Recovery Girl healed him. Has he found anything yet?
Fukakado shrugged. I don't really know. He was kind of ignoring the world, honestly, and was muttering so fast I didn't catch all of it. He said All Might a few times and something about the dawn of quirks, but I really don't know. She grabbed a plastic chair from against the wall and sat on it backwards, so her folded arms were draped on the back of the chair and she was facing him. Honestly, I'm fairly certain at this point he was just trying to channel his anger. Shoto sighed.
Yeah, I'm pretty angry at those villains too.
Fukikado gave him an unreadable expression. That's not... I mean, yeah, he's angry at them too, but...
What?
Fukikado sighed. He won't talk about it, but apparently All Might cornered him after the attack. Told him to give up being a hero.
That no good son of a...
Ah, don't get up, Eraser! Fukikado pushed him gently back into the bed. Don't worry, we've already sick Nighteye on him, but he was in pretty bad shape too, from what Recovery Girl said, so it might be a bit before he's allowed to have visitors. She gave him a look. And those visitors won't be allowed to kill him. Shoto huffed.
I don't think I'm in a condition to kill anyone. At least not right now.
Fukikado laughed, then looked at him softly. We were really worried about you, you know? Shoto looked down at the bed.
Yeah, it was so scary. I thought I was gonna lose them, Joke. They outright said they were gonna kill the students a few times, and I tried so hard to protect them, and then Deku was facing down Shigaraki, and I couldn't do anything. I was pinned, and I just felt so hopeless.
Shoto knew he sounded broken, so he couldn't bring himself to look at Fukikado until she rested her hand gently on his knee. She smiled at him softly, but her eyes were wet with tears. I know, Shoto. I can't even imagine how scared you must have been for your students, but you fought anyway, and none of your students had major injuries. You did good. Shoto frowned.
It doesn't feel like it.
Fukikado sighed. No, it doesn't.